When someone's looking to get back into contemporary fantasy, there are a lot of names that come up, but there's one name that tends to come up first and most often. That name is Brandon Sanderson, the incredibly prolific author behind one of the most ambitious fantasy projects since the one he was hired to finish for someone else, the Cosmere. If you're completely unaware, the Cosmere is Brandon's own fantasy universe populated with various worlds with their own unique and highly developed magic systems and societies. The franchise at present is mostly focused around two main long-running series and a rather large amount of one-off books and short stories, some of which are planned to be turned into series themselves in the future. In the beginning, connections between these works were light and tenuous, but as I understand it, have become ever further integrated as time has gone on. And after finishing what many would consider to be the best entry point into the Cosmere, I can definitely say that I'm intrigued. While not the first officially published work in the Cosmere, the original Mistborn trilogy, or Mistborn Era 1, is often cited as the best entry point due to it being more polished than Brandon's debut novel Elantris, as well as demonstrating his unique strengths as an author in a more digestible form than his later, much longer endeavors. But enough prelude. What did I think of the books? I'm going to try to be as spoiler-free as I can with this assessment, and speak in relatively broad terms. If I had to describe the core appeal of Mistborn, I would say that it sets out to flip the script on a few core tenets of classic fantasy and deconstruct a number of prominent tropes. The series opens with the evil overlord not having already won, but having cemented his reign for 1,000 years. The vast majority of the population serves as slaves to a ruling class that is absolutely obedient to the Lord Ruler and his all-powerful enforcers. The world itself is presented as one that has had the life choked out of it, to the point where even something like green grass is presented as not even a distant memory, but nothing more than a long-rumored hearsay that is frequently met with disbelief and mockery. But as we all know, the real key to complete domination is controlling the flow of information. Much of the world's true history and culture has been suppressed or eradicated, and technological progress brought to near total stagnation. Which brings me to what I consider the strongest element of the series. The masterful way in which the world building itself is presented as a mystery. How did the world end up like this? Who exactly is the Lord Ruler, and what are the secrets to his incredible power and longevity? At the start of the series, even supposed masters of the primary magic system, Allomancy, have a shoddy and incomplete understanding of how it works in totality, as well as how it interacts with other things, and where it even sprang from. Nearly every new chapter teases you with tantalizing questions regarding the true lore of the world and the secrets of Allomancy, and answers arrive at a steady clip, albeit with plenty of misdirection, half-truths, and vague resolutions left up to interpretation. This completely changes the structure of the narrative compared to more typical fantasy. Instead of dumping exposition upon you and then explaining why you should care, the series supplies you with reasons to be curious, and then gradually satiates that curiosity. Many of my favorite scenes involve characters trying to puzzle out the world they inhabit, just the same as I was. It's for this reason that I would highly advise not poking around too much online, as I really do think the blinder you are going in, the better the experience will be. While the setting suffers a bit from a lack of dynamism and complexity due to its understandably heavily subjugated nature, it more than makes up for it in the sheer amount of intrigue and fascinating history and lore, and the incredible way in which it is doled out to the reader. I meant to say incredibly unique. Allomancy has sort of become the poster child in fantasy for hard magic systems, and after reading this trilogy I can definitely understand why. It is intricately developed, perfectly consistent, and both incredibly unique, and also just plain cool. I did find that action scenes involving it can get a little overly technical in description, so it might occasionally get tedious in application, but that's a small price to pay for how well executed it is as a concept. And the fact that there's still more about it that I don't know yet to discover in future books leaves me very excited. The main source of deconstruction in the series regards the nature of prophecy. I'm generally not a big fan of prophecy in fiction, but this is definitely one of the most unique takes on it I've ever experienced. Much of the mystery involves a central prophecy which has been obscured through loss of information, lacking critical perspective, and flat-out misinterpretation. In particular, I love the epigraphs attached to the start of each chapter, which offer perspective from a mystery commentator often devoid of context, which can serve to add further background details, misdirect the reader, or reinforce the importance of something previously assumed negligible. I really can't say much more without spoiling, but suffice it to say that whatever story was quote-unquote supposed to happen went horribly, horribly wrong somewhere down the line, and figuring out the why and how is just as fascinating as discovering how the rest of the world around it functions. As far as the characters go, my impressions were overall positive, but I definitely think it's not one of the series' stronger points. The ones given prominent focus are well-realized, grounded, and have arcs ranging from passable to actually pretty great, but in retrospect you can definitely tell which were the golden children and which probably could have used more time in the oven. There's nothing I would call bad, but compared to how intricately planned everything around them feels, the character work could be described best as generally competent, occasionally great, often missing key opportunities, and not contributing much by the end when all said or not contributing much by the end when all said and done. Sorry, that's an or, not an and. Again, being as vague as possible, there's one central character that has a fantastic arc over the first book, but basically reaches the peak of their development there, and isn't given nearly as much to work with in the sequels. There's another prominent character that goes through a great deal of growth in the second book, only to have a jarring shift of personality come the third. The change makes contextual sense given the events, but it sort of undermines the build-up when it's so radically recontextualized off the page. Additionally, I can't help but feel that some characters could have potentially had their roles combined for greater effect, as there are a few that had promise but ultimately came up half-baked. None of that is a deal-breaker for me when everything else is so compelling. Some of my favorite stories are ones with merely passable character work, such as Shinsekai Yori, but just to set expectations properly, this is not an area where Mistborn excels, but it's definitely good enough to carry itself through. Part of Mistborn and Sanderson in general's success can be attributed to how accessible he makes epic fantasy, which, deserve it or not, has a reputation for being a bit insular and stuffy. While I wouldn't call his prose minimalist, care was definitely taken to put in as few obstacles between the reader and the text as possible. The writing is direct, to the point, and clean. Little, if any, space is wasted on details that aren't relevant or interesting. It rarely ever loses focus of the point of the scene, and the narration is delivered in a very casual, modern way. Additionally, these books are broken up into many reasonably paced chapters, almost always revolving around a singular scene or a set sequence of tightly related events. This makes the books very easy to pick up and grind through bit by bit. I read the smaller mass-market paperbacks from the box set, and I would say most chapters average around 6 to 12 pages, making them brisk and providing many natural stopping points. I often felt that just one more sensation as I burned through chapters before going to bed, which speaks to how both engrossing the overarching narrative was, and to how well it's paced and presented. But ultimately, you don't need me to tell you that Mistborn is good. Of course it is. Its reputation precedes it, and I don't have much to add that everyone else hasn't already said. It's a great introduction to modern fantasy, and everyone with even a passing interest in the genre should, and probably already has, given it a try. It might not be to everyone's taste, in particular if you're someone who needs super strong character writing to stay engaged, this series might drag a bit. The overt bleakness of the setting might also be off-putting for some. While it's nowhere near grimdark, the atmosphere is essentially always one of oppression, uncertainty, and particularly later on, dread. But if the prospect of a well-paced and beautifully constructed mystery, complex and imaginative magic system with hard rules, and subversion of many stable fantasy tropes sounds enticing to you, it's definitely worth a look. Sorry. That's my take anyway, and I'm definitely planning on diving further into the Cosmere. Zeke Freak out. Ciao ciao for now.